to Mexico until his death, to see the dates. So I want to talk about not only a movie, of course, but the topic of the possibility of nuclear war. That's why there is Oppenheimer on one hand and Putin on the other. The probability of nuclear war in Europe has never been as high as it is now. I'm not even mentioning the Middle East and Iran, who is there ready to act. I thought it was a good idea, especially for a conference devoted to images, the power of images, to talk about a movie. Talks like mine, writings like mine, they lack an essential element: the power to generate emotions. If not, talks have no impact. That's why it was so important for me to be able to show clips. So it's not because to remind you what the movie is, but to have you vibrate with these images. I think this movie by Christopher Nolan is an absolute masterpiece. Its worldwide success is fantastic. There must be a reason for that. Talking about it is not the same as being exposed to it. So that's why I'm really sorry not to be able to show a number of clips that would have been essential to consistency of my talk. This film raises a fundamental question. What kind of person was required to build a weapon that was potentially capable of killing hundreds of millions of human beings and destroy the world? What kind of person? In the same way that René Girard contended that Shakespeare's plays addressed two kinds of public and accepted two kinds of interpretations, one in accordance with numeric theory, the other one masking its lesson, I'd like to submit that Oppenheimer, the film, permits two very different interpretations. The first one probably accounts for the universal success of the film. His first interpretation presents Oppenheimer as a hero, beautifully performed by the Irish actor Cillian Murphy, whose invention, the A-bomb, brought Second World War to an end and should have, by its sheer existence, prevented any kind of future war, be it conventional or nuclear. A universal agreement signed by all nations would have permitted that. It should have been signed the day after Trinity. It's the title of a famous movie and film. The day after Trinity. Trinity, I recall, is the code name of the first nuclear explosion in Alamogordo, New Mexico. That took place on July 16th, 1945. This date is absolutely essential. Keep it in mind, please. July 16th, 1945. The test proved that the bomb was breaking. Oppenheimer, according to his first interpretation, unfortunately, was prevented from carrying out this glorious program due to a series of circumstances that led to his public humiliation. His communist sympathies deemed irresponsible at the time of McCarthyism, his opposition to the H-bomb that connected with the military-industrial complex, and last but not least, the personal hostilities that he had fostered during his long and brilliant career, starting with a hatred that Louis Strauss, then chair of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, AEC, nurtured against him. After a series of hearings engineered in 1954 by Strauss, Oppenheimer's career was destroyed and he was stripped of his government security clearance. This first interpretation is a classic story of the rise and fall of a hero turned martyr. The kind of tale that is too beautiful to be true. My take is that Christopher Nolan uses all the resources of his heart to demystify this tale and replace it with a much more human and complex story. The Oppenheimer character certainly emerges less glorious and tragic, but much closer to Girard's anthropology. I don't want to reveal at this stage what the interpretation I'm proposing would be, because I'm going to build it step by step. Oppenheimer, the film, tackles many historical and technical questions about nuclear weapons. I'd like to highlight 4 of them. You know how it works. Oh yes, sorry. I wanted to say, but it's a joke and I don't... I have 2 goals. The first goal is to save humanity from the nuclear holocaust. And the second goal is to sell my book, The War of Madness North America. I still don't know which goal is more important for me. Okay. I've noticed that many Georgians are not yet aware of this book, and that's a bit sorry about that. So as you probably know, the Nolan's movie is based on a biography by Bird and Sherwin called American Prometheus. The 4 points I want to now tackle are: what was the purpose of inventing the bomb? The mirage of nuclear peace, Oppenheimer's nuclear doctrine and its implementation by Putin. I insist that this talk is meant not only to talk about the movie Oppenheimer, but about the current situation. And fourth and last, justice or peace. What was the purpose of inventing the bomb? Let me see. Okay. That's the first one, and I'm going to, how do I go backwards? Could you explain to us? No? Okay. It is, until, if I put the question to you directly, you would probably say what everyone says. The purpose was the need to outpace Hitler. It's certain that this goal played an important role in the decision to set up the Manhattan Project. After all, it was a German, Otto Hahn, who in January 1939 succeeded for the first time in achieving the fission of the uranium atom by bombarding it with neutrons. However, by mid-1942, that is, when the Manhattan Project started, there was no Nazi bomb on the horizon anymore. Led by Werner Heisenberg, the German project had been on the wrong track from the start, and it was better suited to building a uranium pile capable of releasing energy than a bomb intended to explode and destroy nations. And we know today that even that first goal, producing electricity, the Germans didn't manage to achieve it. This failure can be explained in part by the fact that many of Central Europe's most prominent physicists, being Jews, had fled to America, and some of the greatest had joined the Manhattan Project. I can't cite, but I have little time, Leo Szilard, Edward Teller, Eugene Wigner, John von Neumann, all coming from Hungary, Hans Bethe. I said from Germany, I meant from Hungary. I said Hungary, okay. And Hans Bethe from Germany. The note in passing, all of them got the Nobel Prize in Physics, except Oppenheimer. The question is, of course, did the Americans become aware of this failure before the end of the war? If they were not aware, this is not important. This too is a controversial question. One can at least conjecture that serious doubts were raised when, and that's a scene that plays an important role in the movie, when Niels Bohr, the Danish, one of the inventors of quantum mechanics, who had been Heisenberg's professor before the war. Niels Bohr, a Jew, Heisenberg, not Jew. When Niels Bohr fled Denmark, he joined Oppenheimer and Los Alamos at the end of 1943. And he had important information, of course, to reveal. The espionage also played an important role, and that's part plays an important role in the movie. So why continue to build a bomb? Nolan's movie offers an answer to this question. If you've watched the movie only once, you may have missed a 1-minute scene which contains in a nutshell all the complexity of the narrative. That scene is not a biography on which the film is based, and it is likely that it was made up by Christopher Nolan. The action takes place between Hitler's suicide on April 30th, 1945, and Germany's surrender on May 7th. So a small window of 7 days. That's when the scene is supposed to take place. In Los Alamos, New Mexico, the fabrication of the bomb was going on feverishly. I repeat that the test bomb named Trinity was to explode on July 16th. Here is the transcript of the scene. I was certainly anticipating that we couldn't see it. We are not going to see it. It's really a problem. But fortunately, I have the transcript here. That's the next slide. The context, Oppie is writing, no, not yet, please. Oppie, that's his nickname of Oppenheimer. Oppie is riding his horse, and he comes across a poster announcing a public meeting described as, quote, discussion, the impact of the gadget on civilization. The gadget is a nickname of the bomb. Oppie walks in and joins the conversation. Nolan films him with a low-angle shot that is from below. This is very important. In such a way that he appears as a prophet. This is the transcript. So I have to read it out instead of showing it. So there are several speakers. Hornig, one of the engineers, when Hitler blew his brains out in that bunker, it is my humble opinion that there is no need for that bomb to be seen anywhere except for that test site. Lily, one of the engineers also, we at least have to take a moment to think about whether the means justify the end any longer, because Germany is about to surrender. Applause. It is no longer the enemy who are the greatest threat to mankind, it is our work. Which means that within the Manhattan Project there were serious controversies. Oppie has arrived on his horse. Hitler is dead, it is true. But the Japanese fight on. But their defeat seems assured. Oppie, not if you are a GI preparing to invade. We can end this war, someone. But how do we justify using this weapon on human beings? And Oppie's long response, we are theorists, yes. We imagine a future, and our imaginings horrify us. They won't fear it until they understand it, and they won't understand it until they've used it. When the world learns the terrible secret of Los Alamos, our work here will ensure a peace mankind has never seen. A peace based on the kind of international cooperation that Roosevelt always envisaged. End of the scene. It lasts 1 minute. When I first saw the movie on the big screen, I said there is something wrong there. I mean, the phrase struck me as bizarre. When I saw the movie for the second time, I understood what it was. And what we have no time for. I could ask you, Don't you think anything bizarre here? Okay, let's help you. We have no time. We at least have to take a moment to think about whether the means justify the ends any longer. The means justify the ends. That's a phrase that is never used. It's the other way around. Is it Christopher Nolan's mistake in the writing of the scenario? It took me the third vision to understand that this phrase is highly significant. The common justification, as I said, is the converse. The end justify the means. In politics, it characterizes what is called realism. Realism is not necessarily thought of well. Recall Churchill saying to Neville Chamberlain after Munich, September 30th, 1938, Britain had the choice between war and shame. She chose shame to avoid war. She will get the war too. Realism, the defect of realism. The passage I'm discussing offers a key illustration of this logic. The bomb has become useless as regards Germany, but it can put an end to the war against Japan, claims the opinion. Of course, it's not ethical. It may even be monstrous to drop the bomb over the Japanese, but that can be a lesser evil. For otherwise, the country would have to invade Japan by the southern island of Kyushu on November 1st, generating maybe hundreds of thousands of casualties. So using the bomb may be a necessary evil. This is the common interpretation. The fleet that went to Hiroshima on August 6, 1945 was composed of 5 B-29, B for Boeing. The first one was the weather plane, the second carried bomb. The last one, the fifth, carried the engineers, scientists, etc., who were there to measure the effects of the bomb and the form of the cloud, the temperature, the pressure, etc. Like all the other B-29, he had a name. This is its image. Okay, I've just said that. Necessary evil. Here it is. This mixture of science, death, ethics, and sex has something. Well, you can decide yourself how you react to that. But comes Lee's objection. Japan is almost completely defeated. That was true. At this stage, it's necessary to refer to a colleague of mine at Stanford, historian Martin Bernstein, whose work, in my mind, gives a definitive account of Truman's decision to drop the bomb over Japan. On July 17th, the day after the Trinity, there was a meeting in Potsdam, the southwestern suburb of Berlin, of Truman, Stalin, and Churchill. Truman knew that the bomb was working the day before. And he did everything he could to reject all means to end the war other than using the bomb. The bomb was not necessary. If I had the time, of course, I could take a half day to explain all that. But it was also not sufficient, because Japan didn't surrender until August 15th, when Emperor Hirohito dismissed his Navy chief, who was ready to sacrifice half of the Japanese population to not lose face. The bomb was neither necessary nor was it sufficient. It was irrelevant. Here we find the meaning of the bizarre phrase, the means. Otherwise, it's how you could go backward, please go backward for me. Yeah, thank you. the means justify the ends any longer. What does that mean? It means that the means justify whatever ends are achievable by these means. In other terms, the means are ends in themselves. The bomb exists, it will be used. That's what it means. The means determine the ends. This maxim is more relevant today than ever, as President Putin is keen to remind us. We have a bomb. Pay attention to us. Then comes the end of the passage. Second part of the cigarette, the passage and business. The mirage of nuclear peace. Behind Oppenheimer's words, you have a basic idea which is simple and appealing, however too simple and even simplistic. The enormous power of the atomic bomb, according to this idea, is a sufficient reason to dissuade or deter anyone from even thinking of using it. That's a basic idea. In other terms, the principle of deterrence derives, as a matter of practical reason, from its incommensurable destructiveness. Who could possibly have an interest in escalating a conflict to the point that there are no winners, only losers? By the way, last year in Paris, I talked about these things also, and I proposed a critique of René Girard's and Benoît Chant's marvelous book, Achille Clauset. But contrary to the publicity around this book, it doesn't say anything about nuclear war, for a very simple reason. Clausewitz and the authors of the book have in mind conventional wars, where there is a winner and a loser, and where the goal is to win. In the matter of nuclear war, there are no winners, just losers. So the goal is not to win, the goal is to avoid the war, which is completely different. Even conventional, according to this idea, even conventional wars have become impossible for a reason. We admit that there is an escalation to the extreme, Clausewitz, Girard. But the extreme here is a world war waged with nuclear weapons, which, according to the current argument, cannot occur. So the impossibility of nuclear war entails, going backward, the impossibility of conventional war. Are you convinced by this argument? This is one of the most influential living American thinkers think about it. So, no, I shouldn't. Oh yes, here it is. I've always thought about the issue of nuclear war. It's a very important element in my thought process. It's the ultimate catastrophe, the biggest problem this world has. And nobody's focusing on the nuts and bolts of it. It's a little like sickness. People don't believe they are going to get sick until they do. Nobody wants to talk about it. I believe the greatest of all stupidities is people's believing it will never happen because everybody knows how destructive it will be. So nobody uses weapons. What's bullshit? What a great American philosopher today, great thinkers I should say, has written these lines. Huh? Who? I said it, okay, but maybe you have read it. Yes. Yeah. So, what I mean by this example is not that since an imbecile or an idiot said these things, they are stupid. It's exactly the opposite. If even an idiot is capable of thinking them through, then everybody should be able to think them through. These questions have been with us since 1945, and they remain no less perplexing today. And Oppenheimer may have been one of the first to articulate them. History, of course, has decided the existence of nuclear weapons has in no way prevented conventional wars. Look at the current war in Ukraine. Let's consider this proposition seriously, that is historically. The realization on the part of the two supernuclear powers, the US and USSR, that they share the supreme common interest of avoid the nuclear war. You understand, I mean, the case the nuclear plays incites cooperation and not mutual fight. This idea is very, very strong. And conventional wars, completely different wars. So this perception that the nuclear powers in conflict have an immense common interest had led them to act and to set up rules in the form of international treaties or codes of good conduct in such a way as to nip in the bud anything that could start an escalation. With more time, I will describe the treaties known Start 1, Start 2, etc. I could also cite Kennedy and Khrushchev, who managed to put an end to the Cuban Missile Crisis. They were on the brink, but wise enough to give rationality prevailed at the ultimate moment, but it prevailed. Another important treaty, supremely pertinent to understand the current crisis, was the, so I think I have to go backwards. Yes. The INF Treaty, INF, that means Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, signed in Washington in December 1987. The two leaders thereby agreed to eliminate from their respective nuclear arsenals all missiles, and ban all missiles with ranges between, remember, these, although they are partially arbitrary, ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. The two leaders had met a year before in Reykjavik, capital of Iceland, and then they came very close to reaching an agreement in principle on a general disarmament. The agreement didn't get through, but they thought, to use a magnificent French word that you use in English, but they thought had nonetheless been established and led in the following year to the INF Treaty. On February 1st and February 2nd of 2019, 5 years ago, two things happened that were largely unnoticed by world public opinion. And in large measure, they account for the present state of affairs in Europe. First, Trump, and the day after Putin, announced that the countries intending to withdraw from the INF Treaty. This treaty had probably contributed to the peace in Europe during the last 30 years. It is against this background that the most recent events are to be seen, including Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, while threatening anyone who might stand in his way with nuclear annihilation. At the end of the day, we must acknowledge that rationality, here the sheer acknowledgement by the nuclear powers that they share the same conception of evil, the evil that a nuclear war putting an end to human civilization would represent, this minimal rationality has played a role in the simple and amazing fact that there has been no nuclear war so far. Where is it? Okay, no one I want to compare. However, we shouldn't rejoice too fast. The worm was in the fruit. The worm is one of the most powerful passions that drive humans crazy. fear. In the present case, it's the fear that the enemy might strike first. It would be contrary to his interest, but it's not impossible that it might strike first. Some device had to be invented to deter the enemy from attacking first, out of fear that I attacked him first. Okay, it's complicated, so I have to say it again. Some device had to be invented to deter the enemy from attacking first, out of fear that I attack him first. Naturally, this device was called nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence. So I have to propose here a very short tutorial. Okay, I cannot do it. Tutorial about the three uses. Thank you. Yes, next. Okay, uses of nuclear force. That's also, Ashby Clausewitz sees only defense and attack. In the case of nuclear war, there is a third element, essentially, deterrence. So we have three elements, three poles, and not two. Defense, attack, it's called preemption, and deterrence. Let me say a word about deterrence first. Okay, so it was President Reagan who, in March 1983, in a speech to the United Nations, said the following: since the dawn of the atomic age, we've sought to reduce the risk of war by maintaining a strong deterrence, it refers to deterrence, and by seeking genuine arms control. And then this phrase, which stayed in many memories, wouldn't better to save lives than to avenge them. Because what is deterrence, as I'm going to show, it's the threat of incommensurable, not strikes, but retaliations, vengeance. So it's better to save lives, that is preventing the enemy missiles from reaching my nation. It's called the technical term is Strategic Defense Initiative, known as Star Wars. So it seems by experience and in theory that the defense cannot work. And Robert Montgomery explained why. Defense is a total failure if it is successful only 99.9% of the time. Because the first missile, so defense is really a shield made of missiles capable of eliminating the attacking missiles. The first missile that goes through the shield is one tool. It will trigger the escalation to the extreme, called bad mission, mutually assured destruction. So even if the US is still pursuing this path, it's not very promising. Now, deterrence. Deterrence, it's a threat, or if you prefer, promise, the same thing here. The threat of an incommensurable reprisal as soon as a line is crossed. But generally, the nuclear powers don't define the line. They say there is a line beyond which Putin said there is a beyond which I will attack you with my nuclear weapons. But of course, this threat requires a second strike capacity susceptible of triggering an escalation to the extreme, known as MAD. Because in order to retaliate, you must have the power, the technology to retaliate. So, situation of deterrence presupposes or implies a situation where the two powers, or maybe more, have this second strike capacity. This is absolutely essential. Many people, many theorists of deterrence consider that deterrence is ineffective as a matter of principle, since it assumes that if the enemy ignores the threat and attacks you first, by making good of the threat will cause my own annihilation, not only his, and the rest of the world by the same token. In other terms, the threat of incremental retaliation is absolutely not credible. How many heads of a nuclear state have had the courage and the freedom to admit that they would never have pressed the red button even after a first attack? Do you know many? I know one. Unfortunately or fortunately, it was my president, Giscard d'Estaing, who in his memoirs admitted that he would never have the Texas attack. He would never have pressed the button. Rendering, of course, the credibility of the French nuclear threat equal to zero. So, deterrence. So, deterrence would be a priori ineffective. The brilliant and crazy idea that came to the rescue of deterrence was to say the best way to show the other nation that I'm not going to attack them first is to show them that I'm not defending myself. I expose my population to the others. I got it. Is it folly or is it? Well, it's a same folly and rationality. What's the reasoning? If I show the other guy that I'm not defending my nation, it's the best proof I can give him that I won't attack him first, because if I did, he would maintain a capacity of second strike. He would strike back, and since I'm not defending myself, he would annihilate me. So this logic, no party defends himself, was the object of a famous treaty signed in Moscow in May 62 between Nixon and, I'm going to skip this, and Brezhnev. Between the two heads, you see Brzezinski, who was the aide of Nixon. Absolutely fundamental treaty. By this treaty, the two powers assured the other that they wouldn't defend themselves against the other's attack. Well, I'm going to skip a step here, because Bill Clinton versus Vladimir Putin repeated the fact that he wouldn't defend himself. Don't worry, the shield will not prevent you Russia, from being able to destroy America if you had to. I'm not going to cut this, really was said. The missile anti-missile shield that we're building is for rogue states, against rogue states. But you, Russia, you are still able to go through this treaty and destroy the America. So, this is the height of folly and the height of rationality. So Clinton trying to convince Putin, and Putin a bit skeptic. Renouncing defense was a little too much for general staffs who are trained in the principled idea that the legitimacy of military force rests on the defense of the nation. Another limitation of Ashley clauses is that the authors say defense is deterrence implies the renunciation of defense. You see the importance of this idea. But renouncing defense was way too much for many military general staffs, of course. According to the late a very important author. I'm not going to say anything about him, given the limitation of time. Daniel Ellsberg, known to the American public because he revealed a long time ago the so-called Pentagon Papers and precipitated the fall of Nixon. But during all his life, he was, as you can see, a nuclear war planner. And recently, well, he died last year. Just before dying, he wrote this magnificent book, which influenced me a lot, The Doomsday Machine, about the logic of the nuclear war. And what Ellsberg claims in this book is that deterrence has seldom been practiced during the Cold War and ever since. US nuclear policy has often sacrificed deterrence to what is called preemption. Preemption is the name given to attack in the nuclear domain. What is preemption? Preemption implies that an enemy attack is imminent, but so imminent that you take the first step as if the other had already taken the first step. Actually, the nickname of preemption is striking second first. Striking second first. You are the first to retaliate. But against what? You retaliate because the other has not attacked you. But it is as if, according to Ellsberg, the primary objective of the US was never to guarantee that it would not attack first. To the contrary, the objective was to make the enemy believe that the US was in fact ready to attack first. The reversal is complete. Ellsberg's thesis was corroborated in February 2018 when John Bolton, 2 months before becoming Trump's new national security advisor, stated that he found it perfectly legitimate that the US should respond to what he called the imminent threat posed by North Korea by striking first, wiping North Korea off the face of the earth. More than a decade earlier, George W. Bush and his partner Dick Cheney had thought of a more expeditious alternative to negotiations with Iran in order to prevent him from equipping himself with atomic weapons, destroying it by means of a preemptive attack. As if Iran had already attacked. Okay, you see the logic. How about Oppenheimer? I've not. Well, I probably surprise you if I say that he too favored preemption over deterrence. This leads us to my third and next to last point. Where is it? Oppenheimer's trajectory and its implementation by Putin. It's an incredible statement, but I can make it legitimate. Putin is the inheritor of Oppenheimer. Was Opie a tragic character torn between pride in a job well done and the realization that he had opened Pandora's box and that everything had to be done to prevent a headlong rush toward increasingly destructive weaponry? Was he constantly plagued by doubts, which he paid for with the humiliation of having his clearance revoked? I don't believe any of this. In Nolan's movie, those who express their doubts are Opie's fierce enemy, Louis Strauss, the head of the National Atomic Energy Center. His emissary, the pseudo-prosecutor Roger Robb, and President Trump. The cruelest words come from his wife, Kitty, beautifully played by the great, wonderful Emily Blunt. Twice she calls out to her husband, "Stop playing the martyr. You do that in order to be forgiven by the world for the crime you have committed in giving it the means to destroy itself." Let me flesh out what I take to be the interpretation that Christopher Noel reserves for the happy few. In a conference devoted to putting René theory to the test of the real world, I can get straight to the point. In his masterly study of Dostoevsky's novels, Girard coined phrases such as underground pride and pseudo-masochism. What makes underground pride different from pride is that the subject combines self-glorification and self-humiliation. What makes pseudo-masochism different from simple masochism is that the individual transforms humiliation into the pride of victimhood. The narrator in Dostoevsky's novella Notes from the Underground, 1864, can multiply paradoxes such as, I do not respect myself, I find pleasure in my own humiliation. Or speaking of other people, now I despise them, now I set them above me. This constant oscillation between extremes is the mark of underground psychology. I was going to show 4 short excerpts from the movie that illustrate dramatically this Jean-Pierre Dostoevsky interpretation of Oppenheimer's personality. It's Edward Teller, and then Kitty, Oppenheimer and Kitty, Moral Cause, Truman, and Oppenheimer. I'm unable to do this. Well, I could use words, but you understand that words cannot replace emotion. Emotion coming from images. Images, in principle, the topic of this conference. Kitty, the first segment, seemed to despise her husband for accepting to shake hands with Hungarian physicist Edward Teller, who has just shot down Oppenheimer in flames at the 1954 fatal hearing. In the second Oppenheimer and Kitty segment, we see Kitty in tears, voices her opinion about her husband's coward behavior. Oh, by the way, I may have a few, since I was young. You need to stop playing the martyr. Did you think that if you let them tar and feather you, the world would forget you? It won't. And Oppenheimer responds, we'll see. Well, they never see. The third excerpt shows the special counsel to the 1954 Atomic Energy Commission hearings and would-be prosecutor Roger Dupuy, beautiful actor, wonderful actor, denouncing Oppie's moral qualms and their total inconsistency. You had no moral scruples in 1945. You were in favor of dropping the bomb over Hiroshima. And in 1944, 1949, you had scruples that prevented you from contributing to the design of the H-bomb. The fourth excerpt is the crux. It is a confrontation between President Truman and Oppenheimer, in which the latter, Oppenheimer, betrays his boundless pride under the guise of perfect humility. He's dismissed as a pitiful crybaby. Since we cannot see the scene, I'm going to mime it. Huh? I'm not an actor, but no, well, I have to mime it, sir. So I'm at the same time President Truman and Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, President Truman, I feel I have blood on my hands. Truman is hanging, holds it to Oppenheimer as if Oppenheimer was. And Truman says, Dr. Oppenheimer, you really believe that the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki care about who made the bomb? No, they care about who dropped it. And that was not you. it was me. Okay, how to interpret this scene? You could interpret it as a battle, etc. The way you interpret it, and you understand everything that I've said shows it. No, it's once again, Oppenheimer wants to appropriate a decision that he had no role making in order to better be a victim. Self-glorification goes hand in hand with self-martyrization in the word exists. Oppenheimer's movie is a fiction. Actually, the real history, the similar thing in real history, and that the story. Okay, this is what I've just said. The story of Claude Evans, who was the pilot of the first B-29 on the way to Hiroshima. So he gave the green light to Truman. The meteor was good, and Truman gave the green light to the second B-29, which was carrying the Enola Gay, which was carrying the bomb. So the pilot of the weather plane was Claude Evans. When all came back went back to America, they were feted as heroes. Only Claude Evans refused to be honored, and he claimed the right to be punished. But he was not punished. So he started being secrets, little things in a department store. How do you say that in English? You steal things in the department store. What's the word? Okay, thank you. And he was put in a military hospital. The great Austrian philosopher Günther Anders started a correspondence with him, and others tried to convince Claude Evans that behaving the way he did was the same way. Exactly. But what brings together the Oppenheimer story and Claude Evans' story is that it was discovered later that Claude Evans overdid it. He was properly acting in order to better appropriate the authorship of the bombing of Hiroshima. So, I'm going to skip the last, unfortunately, the last section, peace versus justice. So, was Oppenheimer a peacemonger, or was he simply pretending? Oppenheimer's nuclear doctrine can be reconstituted as such. It is based on the clear distinction between two kinds of nuclear weapons, strategic and tactical. Strategic weapons have only one goal, according to Oppenheimer, in this case, to deter the Soviet Union from attacking first. It's a deterrent. Increasing their numbers, as Truman proposed, would have no effect on deterrence. If you can reduce your enemy to radioactive ashes 10 times, why should you aim at being able to reduce it to radioactive ashes 100 times? But in contrast, Oppenheimer believed that multiplying tactical nuclear weapons was necessary to prevail over the Soviets. The year was 1950, at the time of the Korean War. Nuclear tactical weapons are defined less by the medium and short ranges of missiles that carry them, and their relative low explosive power, than by their goal and destination. They are meant to be used on the battlefield in the same way as conventional weapons. They are not meant for deterrence, but for preemption. Preemption that is attack. This is very important point, and it's almost the end. Since 1945, attempts have been made to reduce both the power of nuclear weapons and the range of missiles that deliver them, in the hope of bringing the devastation produced by a nuclear conflict closer to that of a traditional war. Soon it was understood that it was a very bad, good idea. It was, on the contrary, these tactical weapons and missiles that should be banished. Hence the intermediate range treaty that was announced both by Trump and Putin in February, as I said, in February 2019. Because they are relatively low power. Well, one would be enough to destroy Manhattan, but the relatively low power encourages us to use them on the battlefield, as we would with the conventional weapons, which amounts to putting our foot in the nuclear gear, which is destined to go to extremes, that is to say, to mutual annihilation. So these tactical nuclear weapons are the most important danger today. What are the forces in presence in Europe today? And that's the main point, okay. The Fragility, anti-Israel. This is a tactical missile in Moscow. Yeah, also finished, okay? Putin has in Europe 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons and corresponding missiles in 5 countries: the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. Sorry, what did I say? No, it's NATO, sorry, close to the end of the... NATO, okay, I repeat. NATO has currently 100 tactical nuclear heads and the corresponding missiles in 5 countries. The Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. 100. Putin has 20 times more. Until recently, there were, you see this little red between Estonia and Poland. It's called Kaliningrad. At the time of Russia, it was called Königsberg. Königsberg, that's southern harmony of history. The city of Immanuel Kant and his permanent peace treaty. But now, many of them, at least 2,000, 20 times more, in Belarus also. If Putin feels confident, he will use them. After all, suppose this is geopolitical fiction, that Russia installed its medium-range tactical nuclear missiles in a South American country governed by a Marxist government, say Colombia or Venezuela. Washington DC is less than 5,000 kilometers away. Russia could actually even get closer and install her missiles in Cuba, which is only, as you see, 1,800 kilometers. How would the US government react? They wouldn't be happy, would they? Oh, I was about to forget that this already happened in the past, and we know what happened next. 2 minutes, okay? My last one, because we have been talking so much about peace, I have to say words about peace. The problem with nuclear weapons is that they drive a wedge between these two fundamental values that most of us consider as going together, justice and peace. Well, in the present case, if you are in favor of justice, you must wish that Putin be crushed, abandon Crimea, the eastern part of Ukraine, etc. Now, if you value peace, well, your choice must be very different, and you must consider that Zelensky is no less a danger to the world than Putin is, because of his intransigence. And that is probably folly to have what do I say, encourage Finland and soon Sweden to enter NATO, not to mention the opening of talks to have Ukraine join the European Union. And if I can say a word about, I'm not supposed to say it, about my own country, not to mention Macron's idea to send troops to the battlefield. But let there be no mistake, I'm not advocating peace, I'm not advocating justice, I'm just pointing to the fact that we must choose between the two. This is an awful tragedy, and the main culprit is the nuclear weapons themselves. That's why I reached what Pope Francisco, but with very different intellectual means, to be sure. Francisco said in Hiroshima in November 2019, the simple possession of the weapons is perverse. The simple possession, not even the deterrence, used as deterrence, is perverse and immoral. That's also the conclusion of my book. Thank you.